Well, hello everybody. I'm John Kreft. If I haven't met you before, I have a website. I have a website called RiverKeeper Flies. There we go. And I will mute everybody. And just as I mute everybody, if you have a question, go ahead and ask. And Sherry, if there's something in the chat, go ahead and interrupt me. I can manage that. I might say, "Oh, let me finish this step" or something, and I'll get to the question and answer it. So one of the things I wanted to do on fly tying tonight, just about everybody I know ties larger than normal flies on our Zoom session. And I totally understand why. It's easier for everybody to see. I've got my Nikon camera that I use in a macro lens, and I hope that this is large enough for people to see. And so I just want to encourage people to try different size flies. And this is the time of year that we don't see any size, well, I haven't seen any size 10 or 12 or green drake mayflies around. So if you want to fish dry flies or even smaller wet flies, subsurface, there's a lot of blue wings and midges out right now. So I thought it was appropriate to show some of these. I recently had a customer ask for some small flies that I finished, and I thought I would use some of those today. I also highlighted one of the flies, the Black Beauty, is the Throwback Thursday fly a week or so ago, and it was a size 22. So I'm going to tie one of those tonight, and I'll also hopefully get to the size 26 as well. But just a quick story. I've been known to say in the past, several years ago, actually many years ago, if I wanted to fish something smaller than an 18, I would go to the fly shop and buy one. So I just refused to tie smaller flies. However, once I've started practicing and tying a lot more, it got much easier. And so I wanted to share some of my experience tonight and show you some of these smaller flies. So let me do a screen share here real quick. So I had just put some thoughts down that I just want to highlight here quickly. I'll go through each one, and then hopefully tonight I'll demonstrate these throughout 3 different flies that I'll share. The first one is changing thread size. So I tie almost exclusively with Danville 6/70 denier. I used to use uni thread 8/0, and I really loved that. But the uni thread and the Danville both are lightly waxed, and I really like that. I've gotten used to the stretch in them. So I tie a lot of flies, and I just get used to a certain style of thread. And I'll be using some Danville tonight. But on one of the smaller flies, I'll drop down to some size 16/0 Vivas, just to show you. The next one, midge jaws. I'll show you that once I get back to the screen. But if you're constantly tying smaller flies, a different jaw might work better for you. So I'll just demonstrate that. Manage hooks. So on a lot of these smaller hooks, they're very difficult to get a hold of. So I'll show you, you can either use some scissors or tweezers to grab a hold of these. Actually the one that comes to mind, Al Beatty, they prep their hooks ahead of time and put them in hackle pliers, which is a great idea. Using fewer thread wraps. You're going to see tonight that I'll just use a couple of thread wraps to hold materials. And particularly for flies in the 20, 22, 24 size range, we don't want to add a lot of bulk, and so fewer thread wraps will be important. I'll demonstrate how I use my hackle pliers to hold different materials as they're ready. Some of the wires I have are extra fine, and so trying to find them on your fly tying bench might be difficult. Flattening your thread, I'll demonstrate why that's important when I attach some materials, as well as using just very small amounts of dubbing when we're tying small flies. Another thing to consider is how you, once you do your whip finish, how do you add cement? And I know many of you do this, but I'll just highlight what I've done. I'll show you how I place the bead on the hook. And then the last one is as I attach materials to the fly, I pull them so I don't have to go through and trim a lot of the materials. And particularly on small flies, that's important. So the first one I'll tie will be the Higa's SOS. I'm using a Daiichi 1130 18, and I'll use my black Danville. We'll add a silver bead to it, and the tail will be pheasant tail. The rib, silver wire, body working threads. That's one of the easy things for smaller flies, is just to use your working thread for the body. We're going to use some tinsel for the wing case, so I'll show you either ice dub or some dubbing that I would use for the thorax, and then some black crystal flash for the legs. And this is our fly that we'll tie tonight. So let me get back over to the vise. Show all my equipment here. Change my glasses. That's another important thing. If you can't see what you're tying, it's kind of difficult. The first thing I want to show is the vise. So this is a Midge head. And you notice that the one I have here is a regular head. But if you're going to tie a lot of midges, you'll notice that this is cut out somewhat on one end. And it might be easier, but I'll demonstrate tonight that you don't need midge heads, but some of the vices have that as an alternative. So I'll take this, and the other thing is that I'm using a Renzetti, and if you have a Renzetti, there's 3 holes, and those, I never knew it. Most of them come, I believe, set in the middle hole, but the very bottom, I have it set for that so that when I rotate the vise, the fly stays in about the same spot. If you change it, the fly will kind of wobble back and forth, so it makes a difference as you rotate your vise. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'll be using a size 18, 1130. And as I pull it out, my Dr. Slicks are magnetized. They came like that. And so I can pull hooks out. I put it in front of me and separate those two, so I'll just get one. And it's easy for me to grab a hold of them. I will grip down the barb. And the first thing we'll do is get a bead. Oh, wrong one. I've got 3 flies tonight, so I had it laid out here. So this is a tungsten bead. It's a nickel 2 millimeter. And I have a pair of bead tweezers. So I'll pull one of those, and I drop it on my, I can't show this to you. I drop it in front of me, so I get, there's the larger hole on that side and the smaller hole on this side. I put my hand underneath the hook and slide it on. And I found that that's the easiest way for me to attach a bead to the hook. So I'll start my thread right behind the bead. I'm adding a little bit of bulk right there. And for the tail, I have some black pheasant tail. And I'll get, I think, 3 or 4 fibers here. This is 3. I pull them out from the stem or the rachis of this feather, and then hold on to it and pull the feather away, and that will keep your tips aligned. And I'll visually see how long I want this. I'm going to tie it around the bend of the hook a little bit. So I'll measure it and then hold on to it. And just use touching turns as I go down and back up. Get to the tie-in point and remove the excess. I'll tie in my rib next, and it's just some silver wire, small. And I happen to have it on my hackle pliers. So I want you to notice these hackle pliers. I'll show you a different one here in a second, and why I like the second one much better. I generally tie my ribbing on the far side away from me, and I just stick the end of the wire into the bead, and I'll use touching turns again. And remember, I told you I flatten my thread a lot, so I go the opposite direction. And if you have a different thread that you enjoy, you don't need to change to Danville. So this, whichever one works best for you. Just try to get used to the properties of the thread so you know what it will do. I'm just adding a tiny bit of a taper here. And now we'll just take 4 to 5 wraps. Certainly. I get a really good turn on the first one. So you'll find that a lot of times if you put it close to you and you start to wrap it, the wire might impact your tail. So it would push it over to this, it would push it away from me. So when I started on the far side and come up, it doesn't impact that tie-in point. Now I don't remember, I was supposed to do 3 wraps here and then I'll go 1 in front. Let's hope I did. And then I hold tension on my bobbin holder and we'll helicopter that off. For the wing case, I'll tie it in next. This is a medium, some hollow tinsel, red. I'll bring my bobbin holder up. I don't want a lot of room between the fly and the bobbin holder. And I will flatten my thread. So what I'm trying to do is, you notice that my thread is generally staying on top of the hook. So I have 2 thread wraps there, and then pull the materials back, place another thread wrap, and I don't have to go in and trim that. That's particularly important, maybe not on a size 18, but the smaller you go, the less room there is. And I want this down about halfway. And now we'll apply the thorax, the dubbing. You can either use some ice stub, or what I've used a lot is some Spirit River UV2 in black. It's got a little bit of UV in it, and I really like that. But I'll show you on the ice stub. So we'll just pull some out. And as you attach it, go one direction. And the properties of this is different than regular dubbing. So you can see those pieces, it's all synthetic. And so trying to mash that down. And then the other thing I will do is slide it down so I don't have to take a lot of extra thread wraps as I prepare this. And now I will kind of go back and forth to create a little bit of a bump and end right behind the eye of the hook. Now you'll notice I have got some excess here, which we'll trim some. I will tell you that if I look over at the screen that you're looking at, it's much, it's a lot more magnification than what I'm using on my glasses right here. So we'll pull this forward, and as I mentioned earlier, I had the thread right at the eye, right behind the bead. So we'll take one wrap, and I'll pull down tightly, and I can let loose as long as I keep tension. I like to make 3 wraps there and 1 in front, and then I can come down and trim that. And I'm just getting the longer fibers off. I don't care if it's a few of them in there. For the legs, you could use the ice stub, but I'll attach some crystal flash. So I've got 2 pieces here, and I want you to know my hackle pliers. So these are from Cascade Kreft, and they're much easier in order to manage opening them up. So especially on smaller flies, these are 2 pieces of crystal flash. As I apply it, I'm going to put it underneath the thread and pull up, and then the bobbin holder, the gravity will hold that in place. I'll pull it a little bit because I don't need that long. Make a couple of wraps, that's the second one, and using an X wrap, I'll place one there and one more, and then fold them back and place a couple of wraps to hold those in place. The last step then, I think many of you have seen this before, but I'll use some Zap-A-Gap. I have brushable. You can use head cement, that's absolutely fine. And what I've done is to cut a lot of the brush off. So I'll apply some there, put the cap back on, and use a whip finish. On smaller flies, I generally use a 5-turn whip finish, but I'll do 3 or 4 on these. And then I just touch the thread with my scissors and we're done. And I'll come back and trim these legs. We'll get about half the body length. And then if you're tying a lot of flies, you can just replace this and there's ready for the next set. So there is a Higa's SOS in size 18. And you can start with, I generally just tie these in size 18s, but you could tie them in 16s and 18s and 20s, just keep going down from that. One of the tips I would give you is that when you're trying to tie smaller flies, if you start larger and maybe tie half a dozen of them larger, and you should see the fly pattern sheet for the next fly. Is that true, Sherry? Okay, so this is a Mercury Black Beauty. We'll drop down in sizes, so this will be a size 22. And we'll use some black thread. And I wanted to share this with you quickly. So the one I'll tie is on the far right side. That's the Mercury version. The one in the middle is just a Black Beauty. These are Pat Dorsey flies. And the one on the left is a Black Beauty too. The one on the left is a Hooks Daiichi 1140. It's a size 22. The other 2 hooks are a Daiichi 1100 size 22. So they're both, or all of those are size 22 hooks, but notice the difference in the sizes. So this one should be very easy to tie for us. As I mentioned earlier, I'll be using the Danville, the 70 denier. It's black. I'm almost done with this spool. For my ribbing, I've got some extra small copper wire. This is Midge wire. I think I bought this in West Yellowstone from Blue Ribbon Flies. But any small wire. I think I have a piece already cut here. One of my hackle pliers. And it probably isn't necessary, but I put it on the opposite side of me. Take just a soft wrap and then continue down with touching turns. And back up. We'll create a little bit of a taper, but not much. So one of the things I would just want to share is that this is a very simple pattern, and you don't need a lot of materials on many of these smaller flies. So we will just start to rib this fly. Now if I use just a medium size ribbing on this, it would be totally out of place. So just trying to match the size of ribbing to the fly is really important. So there's 3 wraps to hold it down and 1 in front. Hold on to the bobbin holder, and we will parachute or helicopter that off. It doesn't take much. And this time we will use some of that Spirit River UV2. And this is probably going to be too much, but we'll see what happens with it. The other tip is to, as you apply your dubbing, you should do it sparsely in each spot, but you can have a long section that you're going to dub. And now I will just I'm just kind of going back and forth. I've got a couple of longer fibers, but I'll leave the other ones out. And we will finish this fly. And that was 4 turns. I was just watching how much space I have in here, and that was not going to impact or build it up too much. And that's a popular fly pattern. Pat Dorsey says they use that during the winter time on his home waters. So I plan to try that on my home waters, the Metolius, and see if it works. Yeah, there's a lot of different materials you can use for these, and mix and match, and yeah, you go to your heart's content. So yeah, as a beginner, this makes me crazy. So maybe tying small flies. But as I mentioned, I'm just trying to give you some tips that would help you to at least venture into it. And I would say start with the bigger flies, and as you get your technique down, you can, the flies that I chose to show you, the one that I have here in the vise now, just uses thread, a rib, and some dubbing. You don't even have to worry about the bead if you don't want. I would use it on a Euro nymph rig and on my top fly. Or if I were to use a 2-fly setup with a dry fly, I could use that as a dropper as well. So either one of those. Okay, let's get into the last fly then. Here we are. So this is just a midge pattern that I came up with. The GS is just the initials of my customer, and Midge 26. So he wanted to know if I could tie some size 24 flies for him. He was headed over to the Owyhee, and he sent me a picture of a fly, and I said, well, I think I can tie it. And let me just say that the body is just thread and a little bit of a thorax and some black crystal flash. So those are the 3 ingredients. And I'm using a Daiichi 1110 only because that's what I had. I happen to have some size 26 hooks in my drawer here. So the style of hook, the 1110 or 1100 or anything, I was just trying to show size 26. So this happens to be the fly that I came up with. And you'll notice it's got a green body, an olive body, and a black thorax and a little bit of flash. And that was because this is the fly that he sent me. So the top one is what he sent me, and it had been eaten by fish, so I didn't really know what it looked like. And I came up with the bottom one to resemble that somehow. So what I didn't like about the fly that he sent me, it looked to be a lot more robust than what I thought a size 26 should be. But regardless, I just decided that I'd tie it like this. So I just want to, I'll show you. I'll show you this fly. I'll put it in my vise here real quick. So this is the size 26. Just shows how good my lens is, I think. So this is the 18, just for some perspective. And I think what I did was, when I shared this on my website, I placed one of these on a ibuprofen tablet just to show how small it is. So it is super small, I admit that. But I just want to show you and challenge you that I think you can. So you don't need to tie a size 26. You could tie this in a size 20. If you've never tied a size 20 fly before, this is probably a good one to try. And if you drop these on the floor, you will never find them. You can trust me on that. The other thing I want to highlight is that I can't see it just looking at it, but when I'm looking on the screen, I forgot to change colors of thread when I tied this a little while ago, earlier this afternoon. And it's supposed to be black, but I just want to show you that that's what it would look like. Do you think the fish would care? I think probably not. But I'll show you that I'll be changing thread, but just it doesn't have very many thread wraps in it. So let me get my hook out. And as I mentioned earlier, I just happened to have these. I was going to tie a size 24 for him because I had them, and I looked in my drawer and I had 26. Why, I don't know. Size 26. And honestly, I don't know how you debarb them, so I don't. So the trick is to get it into the vise. There we go. And as I mentioned earlier, I will be using some Viva 16-aught. And I'm going to leave a little bit of room, so maybe an eye length back I'll start. I'll tell you, it's much bigger on the screen what you see than what I'm seeing here. Again, this is just the body, so I'm going to go back and forth a couple of times, and if you could get this hook in the vise, you could tie this. Now I will change colors, which I don't know if you need to, but this is again some 16-aught. One of the other things that I think helps if you're tying smaller flies is try to tie things off on top so you can easily get to them and trim. I'll just make one more turn to make sure that it stays. And this one, it will have some flashback. So I'm using some crystal flash. And if I were going to tie several of these, I would pull out more than one strand, but I'll just use one strand, double it over, and I'll do that one more time. I want 4 strands. That's what I'm trying to accomplish here. And I'm going to even the tips up. And you notice that as I make that soft wrap, there's 3 wraps. It stays on top of the hook. So I'll pull this back. I've got loose tension. Now I'll tighten it down. Oh, it didn't work. Let's do that again. Sometimes it's more difficult trying to slow down and show your technique. So I'll pull back a little bit. Now I've got that tied in. My goal is to pull this forward. And it's amazing how much one wrap is on the distance on a shank. So I will be using my UV2. And let's see how much we pull out for a size 26. That's going to be too much. Actually, maybe not. Maybe it would be okay. I'm going to get a little bit more. And as I mentioned in one of my tips, you don't want to have a lot of excess thread wrap, so we'll just slide that down. And that's particularly true on these smaller flies. So I'll be doing my kind of exaggerated back and forth. I want to get the ball the thickest right in the front. And we'll pull over the wing case. There's 2 wraps there. I haven't had that happen. Let's try it again. Yeah, I thought maybe the hook broke. I'm holding a little bit of tension on the thread. Yeah, I just put a drop, or maybe 3 drops of that Zappa Gap on it. And there's a 3-turn whip finish because I don't have a lot of excess room. And then I'll use my scissors and pull the thread. So my scissors are sharp, and just when you pull it, it slices it. You don't have to worry about going in and trying to cut it. I'll hold this up somewhat, and we'll trim. And that's for my next fly. And there's a size 26. I see some longer fibers there, so we'll trim a couple of those. So again, not that you have to tie a size 26, but if you've been tying 16s, try an 18, and then go down to a 20. And I think if you select some patterns that don't use a lot of materials, then you're going to find that they're going to be easier than what you think they are. Okay. Ooh, well, that's what I showed you earlier. These are my Cascade Kreft, and it's kind of an English style. I'll take this out. What I've done is to put on some shrink wrap tubing on one side, and I think I've used this enough. I might need to redo that. But I like how these are what have kind of a radius that are just not to a point, but it seems to work really well for me. So I love these. In fact, I just bought a couple of more just because and they're fairly cheap. But if you just Google Cascade Kreft, or maybe I had them on my, I might have shared them recently, I can't remember now, on my website, but I really like those.